Go. Okay. Good morning. It's Tuesday, February 16th. It's 10:02 a.m. and this is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. Today, we're visiting with members of the administration to learn more about energy, exciting energy proposals coming out of the administration in terms of the governor's recommend that we just got several weeks ago. We wanted to learn more on two fronts. One is on electric vehicle work, and then secondly on the state energy management plan, and to see what the proposals there look like. So with that, I'd like to turn first to Commissioner Walk, and as always, when there are multiple members of the administration, I feel free to move between yourselves, and if you want to pass the baton back and forth. Otherwise, I'll just call the names as they appear, but don't feel constrained by that. So Commissioner Walk, good morning. You want to kick us off?
Thank you, Senator Brett. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. For the record, Peter Walk, Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Appreciate the committee's interest in the governor's proposal in his proposed FY22 budget. Michelle and Riley and I have done this presentation a couple of different times, and so I'm pretty well lined up at this point. And so I will kick it off, and then Michelle and then Riley will go through some more detail on parts of the proposal. We are excited about the opportunity to advance vehicle electrification in the state of Vermont, and also look forward to hearing from Dave Roberts about sort of where we are in the state of the market. So we'll get through this as quickly as possible. I think for the purposes of time, given the constraints that we have today, I would ask if possible that we hold questions to the end, and let us get through it, and then we'll see what questions remain, if that works for you.
Great, sounds good.
All right, I am going to share my screen, trying to switch my brain from Teams to Zoom. Give me a second.
While we're, oops, there we go. I was going to say, while we're in transition, I want to put a plug in for, whoops, let me get it in front of the camera. This report, Senator Westman was pointing it out to me. I read it this weekend in detail. A lot of great information in there.
So I didn't organize my screens properly, so I'm a little bit wrong-sided, but know that I am looking at my slides, but also speaking to you at the same point. Zoom gets a little confusing as to what's happening and where everybody is. But so really excited to be here to talk about this today with you. We are on the cusp of an electric vehicle transformation in this country and around the world. The news out of multiple automobile manufacturers, most notably, most recently, General Motors, about the transition that's underway is great to hear. But we need to, if a market transformation and a change in technology were all the goals that we were hoping to achieve, we would let that market transition happen. The longer we wait to transition to electric vehicles and to other emissions reduction technology in the transportation sector, the more work we have to do elsewhere in the greenhouse gas reduction world. And so we are really hoping, as we've done the last few years in partnership with the legislature, to advance the cause of electric vehicles and really move the market forward more quickly. The Vermont System Planning Committee put together this information as sort of a future forecast of what EV technology could look like. This was before GM's announcement, and so it's obviously sort of a snapshot in time and looked at various projections. As you can see, the ramp up in any scenario doesn't really begin to happen until 2024. So we want to get people moving in that direction faster, because we know that the more people who have electric vehicles out in the market, the more emissions reductions we're getting, and also the sort of familiarity and acceptance of the technology that we'll see. And it also is going to lead to more private action in the electric vehicle charging space, which will further on down the line all the benefits. This is a slide you may be familiar with. I think you've had Jared Duvall from EAN in the past. This is sort of their latest projection. I think they're about to have a more updated version of this that may look at different scenarios. But we're talking about orders of magnitude, or an order of magnitude at least, above where we are now in terms of vehicle sales and registration in the EV front by needed to meet 2025 targets in the Global Warming Solutions Act and being looked at by the Climate Council now. This analysis, which was from last year, looks at essentially sort of needing at least 90,000 EVs on the road by 2025, additional to the ones we have now. That is a really significant increase. I believe we're in the sort of low single digits, mid single digits, thousands of vehicles in sales now. So this really does matter quite significantly that we move forward in a quick way. And so our goals with this proposal and the governor's goals are to remove barriers to EV adoption. We'll go through some of those details, increase the access to all Vermonters to the technology, and to have supportive policies in place. And we'll go through some of this in more detail, but from terms of barriers, looking at the higher purchase price of EVs, sort of general lack of customer and sales force awareness of EVs, and then obviously the sort of charging range anxiety component of distance between charging stations. Trying to look at ways in which we can stack incentives with innovative ideas like the Replace Your Ride program, and then really expand into more transportation options. So it's not just a vehicle for vehicle transformation, but also where possible, a vehicle for an alternative, more efficient mode transition. And then finally, where can EV rate design and electric demand charge modifications come into play to really help accelerate the market? With that, I will hand it over to Michelle Boomhauer from the Agency of Transportation.
Thank you, Peter. For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Director of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. In our proposed package, we hope to build on prior successes that we have seen in terms of the deployment of prior EV incentives. In the 2019 transportation bill, there were $1.1 million in EV incentives for FY20 deployment. And that program got underway in December of 2019, and 1.1 million in incentives for new EVs was deployed by October of 2020. The legislature in 2020 approved an additional $950,000 for EV incentives, and right now there's $531,000 remaining, even in just that short period of basically 2.5 months in terms of the deployment of the additional $950,000. So with that success behind us, we're proposing a $2 million jump in the incentive program for the coming year. On the front of charging equipment, we've had a goal of deploying fast charging networks within 30 miles of all Vermonters. And that goal is going to be realized this calendar year with the final deployment of the $1.7 million in VW settlement funds, which has been combined with other resources historically. We also received $750,000 in the capital bill last year, which will continue to deploy infill charging stations along the highway network. And our new proposal is to now shift to looking at deployment of fast charging for multifamily dwellings, where we could have the stations available for public access during daytime hours, but principally recognizing that folks are charging at home. Folks that live in multifamily dwellings are not likely to have ready access to charging stations. They can't implement them themselves if they're in a rental situation. So we want to begin to shift, knowing that the bulk of charging will occur at people's homes during the nighttime hours when they can get better rates from the electric utilities for charging at that time. And with battery sizes, the increase in battery sizes, most folks will be able to go about their daily activities utilizing home-based charging on that basis, while we still will have the fast charging network for visitors to our community and for emergency purposes. Next slide, Peter. A new program we're looking to roll out is modeled upon a program that has been deployed successfully in California. And it's really targeting lower income Vermonters and the dual desire of wanting to get them into more affordable transportation options, in particular electric vehicles, but they may choose other types of transportation options under this program, and to remove a more highly polluting vehicle from the current fleet. And so this would be an income sensitized program. It would require the person to scrap a vehicle which is registered and inspected, but would be a 2010 vehicle or older. And then they could receive an incentive of up to $3,000 to purchase a newer used electric vehicle, or other lower tier incentives to choose a different transportation option after taking a higher polluting vehicle off the road. So we are currently in conversations with House Transportation through the transportation bill on how this program would be deployed, and we're planning $1.5 million on this program as proposed. Next slide. We would like to continue supporting some programs that, or actually these would be deployment of new programs. The EV sales incentive for dealers and sales force is really designed to incentivize our folks who are on the front lines trying to sell electric vehicles and educate them about all of the complementary incentive programs that may be available at the federal level through tax incentives, at the state level through their distribution utilities and other programs the state may be offering, and to make sure that these folks through this training programs, which would be a part of the incentive program, send a person home with sort of all the tools in the toolbox they're going to need to be successful EV owners. The second program is basically a program designed to help us understand how we are going to convert the public transit fleet into an electric fleet, and understanding the timeline for that conversion, what kind of costs and training and operational and maintenance elements will be required for our public transit providers to be successful in implementing a fully electric public transportation fleet. We have a variety of pilots going on currently, and we are learning a lot from those pilots, and we continue to begin to assemble electric transit vehicles in our fleet, but we want to have an orderly way to move towards this transition. And part of that is adding 7 new electric buses in the public transit fleet this coming fiscal year. Next slide. All right, here is where I am going to turn it over to Riley, and Riley's going to talk about the benefits of charging and driving electric.
So thank you, Michelle. So for the record, Riley Allen, Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Service. What I want to talk about is what we refer to as rate design, but it's really the kind of the way we price electricity, and we think it's you know, a powerful influence on both potentially on the purchase of electric vehicles, but also the building and kind of the moving forward in the higher voltage public charging stations that are out there. Electric rates can have a significant influence on essentially the bottom line for those facilities going forward. What you see here is essentially the costs for each household of different fuels and different areas of the state. The top line is, you know, a typical household would spend about $1,800 on gasoline at essentially the prevailing gasoline price levels now. If they were to switch over to electricity, they would, in certain territories, the higher cost territories, the electricity price would essentially be comparable to gasoline at current levels. If you compared it to the average, it's a pretty significant discount for a variety of reasons. But if you were to look at Green Mountain Power's territory, where they actually have a material discount on the electric vehicle charging rate, it can almost cut it in half. And in BED's territory, they even offer a more substantial discount, which would further provide savings to customers. But the point of the chart is to show that how you price electricity can make a difference. Next slide, please. This slide is intended to show the different ways, or characterize the different ways in which the price of electricity can help to make a difference. Connected to the price, the electric vehicle price, is essentially the intent is to manage the load in some way. That load can be managed either by utility or by customers through some sort of time of use rate. In doing so, loads tend to get smoothed. They can provide an incentive for customers to purchase an electric vehicle for environmental benefits. But underneath it all, it's the charging rate or package can help to reduce the burden of electric vehicle charging on the system for the benefit of the electric vehicle owners and the non-participating customers in the service territory. And the customer is compensated for that flexibility with some form of a lower rate. Part of this is about demand charges. Demand charges are one element of rates. Typically, electric rates involve a customer charge, a per kilowatt hour charge, and a demand charge. When you get up to above a certain threshold in demand or in the volume of electricity sales, you're often essentially forced onto a demand charge rate. For most loads, that would make perfect sense because you're imposing a burden on the system. In the case of electric vehicles, that may not be as compelling, and given the evolution of technologies, there are an increasing number of options for essentially avoiding the demand charge challenges. And we're asking utilities, we believe that utilities should be asked to essentially look at the options as Green Mountain Power is doing today to help lower the cost of electricity to especially the fast charging stations. Next slide, please. So this references the recent news from General Motors that they're planning to essentially shift to all EVs by 2035. In the lower portion of this slide, it's intended to help highlight the different portions of the grid or the electricity system, and to call out the fact that there are actually different value streams that can be associated with managed charging of electric vehicles. They can help in the capacity market, that blue area. They can help in the reduce the burden on the transmission system, and managed charging can actually help at the local distribution system level with the burden on local circuits. Next slide. So why does it matter? Why is it so important that electric vehicle rates be put in place? This provides essentially a glimpse into what electric vehicle loads mean to the grid. On the right-hand side of this chart is essentially a view of loads going forward as we look at much higher levels of penetration of electric vehicles. For the last 16 years, we've seen loads that have been flat to declining. I think our all-time peak was in the neighborhood of 1,080 megawatts. We're down in the neighborhood of 935 megawatts today. And without essentially new technologies, heat pumps and electric vehicles, that blue line kind of shows you, it kind of looks fairly steady. The loads are hanging in there, but not changing very precipitously. But when you add the kind of expected or likely pathways for electric vehicles and heat pumps, that changes. And once you get up above a certain threshold, there has significant implications for the grid, especially the bulk transmission system. We could be talking about major build outs in the neighborhood of the hundreds of millions. I think that's in the 1,200 or 1,250 megawatt range, roughly in the kind of middle of the chart, around 2030 or so. These, when this occurs is highly uncertain. It could be later, could be sooner, but you really don't want to have to depend on the forecasters when you're talking about the grid, because you really have to build the grid to meet the expected load. What you really want to do is take control of these loads as best you can, and you do that by offering essentially some flexibility in those loads, and that comes with incentives or rate design, the rate design proposals that we're trying to put on the table. Rate design is, at least in our view, an important part of managing the cost of service into the distant future, and we need to start putting the key elements in place. Next slide. So overall, I think what we're, at least as it relates to electric vehicle rates, we believe that these are important not only from a consumer perspective, but from a climate perspective. We think that this can be implemented, a regime of sensible electric vehicle rates can be implemented sensibly and flexibly by the Public Utility Commission. So what we're proposing is some broad authority and wish that the commission essentially proceed along this path, and that we set a time frame for actually achieving that, so that we put something in place before we're at risk of substantial growth in the electric vehicle load. So we've targeted June of 2024 in the legislative proposal. So that's it. Thank you. Time for questions.
Great. I'm looking to see committee questions. So quick question of my own. Mr. Allen, you just referred to in the, is there language from the administration? So far, I've seen a budget proposal, but not language to accompany it. Is there language that's been developed, and has it been introduced maybe over in the House, or just trying to stay apprised of what's going on where?
I'm going to defer to Michelle on this. She's leading there.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Bray, the language is included in the transportation bill, which is currently underway in the House Transportation Committee.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, language for what, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Boomhauer, could you describe a little more what's in that package?
So the package includes the details on the various funding and policy items which we've covered today. They're all included in the transportation bill draft language, and I'd be happy to provide a link to the committee in the chat of the language as introduced.
So does that include rulemaking authority?
No, there's not any
Thank you.
rulemaking authority proposed.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. It'd be helpful for us to catch up and see what the language looks like. Thank you. Well, so we're really just getting an introduction to things today, and I'm sure we could have a much deeper conversation, but we're catching up here. And as you know, part of the reason that we've been doing more work in transportation is because of the committee's growing interest in saying, if we're going to be doing sort of, especially for low-income Vermonters, like the sort of one-touch counseling that relates to energy burden, that it's great that we're looking at weatherization, but the largest energy burden they face is related to transportation, as well as the largest, greenhouse gas source. So the program that we're developing looks at addressing both weatherization and transportation. Frankly, we're ahead on our knowledge of weatherization. So that's where we started, and that's what we're leading with. But we do want to be thoughtful about how to create an opportunity on the transportation side, even if we came into the conversation focused primarily on weatherization. All right, well, thank you. So I'll follow up offline with some other particular questions, and thank you, Ms. Boomhauer, for the link to for the language itself. It'll help us. Mr. Roberts, wanted to turn to you. I know we're on a tight schedule this morning because it is really just a first conversation to get the ball rolling. So I don't know if you've prepared some remarks, and
I do. Thank you, Chairman Bray. For the record, David Roberts. I'm a senior consultant and Drive Electric Vermont coordinator at VEIC. And I did file a presentation, which I believe is available on the committee's website. It's about 10 slides. It would take some time to get through it. So I'm not sure that it's if you are trying to wrap this up around 10:30, I'm hesitant to launch into that. So I look to guidance from you.
Sure. We learn to adjust on the fly. So let's do it briefly, just so that we start to set the table for everyone. And I apologize that the schedule is quite so tight, but we will be coming back for sure. So you'll be priming the pump for us.
Okay. Well, in that case, I will. I'll pull it up. And hopefully you're seeing my screen. Yes.
We are,
great.
Thank you.
So I'll run through this quickly. It's available, as I said, to you to look at later. And of course, always happy to follow up with any questions. But a brief introduction to Drive Electric Vermont. It's a public-private partnership that VEIC established in partnership with the state of Vermont in 2012. So VEIC has been coordinating this program the past 9 years, and basically working to advance transportation electrification on a number of fronts. We have quarterly stakeholder meetings that engage with many folks across the state working on these issues and beyond Vermont as well. We're doing consumer education and outreach, so we have a website which is linked here, and supporting charging infrastructure development, incentive programs, kind of you name it, we try to support it and make sure that folks in the state who are working on EV issues are making connections and coordinating and leveraging as much as possible. Many of you I know are very familiar with the Efficiency Vermont energy efficiency utility that VEIC operates. Until very recently, our Drive Electric Vermont work has been very distinct from Efficiency Vermont. We haven't had any funding from Efficiency Vermont ratepayer dollars supporting Drive Electric Vermont work because of the way that Efficiency Vermont has been set up. But the passage of S337 or Act 151 is starting to provide opportunities to sort of crumble that wall that's between Drive Electric and Efficiency Vermont work. The Efficiency Vermont team just filed at the end of last week a proposal with the Public Utility Commission to advance their Act 151 plan, which includes focusing on the EV supply chain and consumer education and outreach. So I'm sure they'd be happy to provide more detail in a future meeting. In addition to sort of the VEIC role as coordinator, we do engage with many other stakeholders that are listed on the left. Call out the state of Vermont as a critical partner, as well as all the electric distribution utilities, environmental organizations, auto dealers, and others. It's just a quick slide with our sort of elevator speech about why electric vehicles are great. This image is from one of our recent marketing campaigns. Some of the more popular models that are available on the left are all electric, on the right, plug-in hybrid. I would note only a few of these are available with all-wheel drive. The Tesla Model 3 is currently the most one of the most affordable all-wheel drive options that you can get today. There are many more coming. On the right side, the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid and the Subaru Crosstrek plug-in hybrid are also all-wheel drive. But as I said, there are many more models coming. So these are some that are already here in Vermont or coming soon. Many of these will have all-wheel drive, although not all of them. One notable one that may not be on folks' radar just yet is the Chevrolet Bolt electric utility vehicle, or EUV. That's in the bottom center of this slide. That was just announced on Sunday. So this is a new General Motors entry. It's based on their Bolt hatchback. It will not have all-wheel drive, unfortunately, but the price is very attractive. We have just a snapshot from the Drive Electric Vermont website where you can filter if you want all-wheel drive. You can choose a filter on the website to just show vehicles with all-wheel drive or all electrics, plug-in hybrids. There's information about federal tax credit amounts, whether it's eligible for the state of Vermont's incentive program, and some other sort of key information that a lot of people are looking for when they're shopping for vehicles. This is just a slide. It's a little bit, it's brand new data released by the U.S. Department of Energy, but it is lagging a little bit in time. But this is basically per capita EV registrations across the country. And you can see, at least as of 2018, Vermont was the leading state in EV registrations east of the Mississippi. So I think it speaks to the work that many have done, including the administration, your committee, other legislators to support EV adoption in the state. Although it is worth noting that we're still not even at half of the EV ownership rate of California, which is definitely out ahead of us. This is just tracking the growth in EV registrations over time. We're at, as of July 2020, which is the most recent data we have available, and this is sourced through Vermont DMV and DEC efforts. It's just under 4,000, so I think it's safe to say that as of today, we're over 4,000, although I don't have an exact number for you. Interesting to note the advance of all electric vehicles over plug-in hybrids. So you can see the plug-in hybrid share as of July 2020, it actually just started to decrease a little bit. And that's because we lost some of the more popular plug-in hybrid models. They're no longer being produced. So the Chevrolet Volt and Ford C-Max Energy, for example, are no longer in production. Many people have leased those. And when those leases are up after 3 years, many times they leave the state. So that's why the plug-in hybrid registrations have tweaked down just a tiny bit. But the all-electric registrations have continued to rise, and that's as we see the more affordable, longer-range models coming into Vermont. Lots of growth in that front. I'm not going to detail this. You can check this out later. Basically, just some of the top-selling makes and models that are out in Vermont. The Nissan Leaf, one of the more affordable options, is at the top of the list, followed by Tesla and others. And then just running through some of the various incentives that are out there. There's the federal tax credit. It's up to $7,500 based on the battery size. Begins to sunset when manufacturers hit 200,000 sales per manufacturer. So General Motors and Tesla have phased out of this. There have been indications that with the new administration, they may be renewing the tax credit to go up to the latest I've seen is 600,000 EV sales. So we're waiting to see what happens on that front, but it does seem promising that some of those companies that have had the federal tax credit lapse will see it resume at some point. The state of Vermont incentive, which is up to $4,000 depending on income and the type of electric vehicle, as Michelle mentioned earlier, is about 530,000 remaining. And that is distributed in partnership with the electric utilities, which are also offering their own incentives. They vary depending on the utility. Many of them have higher incentives for lower income, but generally speaking, it's up to about $2,500 for those electric utility incentives. And many are also offering incentives for home charging equipment in addition to that. And just to kind of provide a snapshot of what that looks like in practice for somebody who's actually in the market to buy a new electric vehicle. Here's the Nissan Leaf. This is the most affordable Leaf version. It's a little bit smaller battery. It's officially 150-mile range. And this is someone who's eligible for sort of the standard incentives. So for the Leaf, it gets the full $7,500 tax credit. It's eligible for $2,500 state incentive. If your income is between 50 and 100,000 adjusted gross income. The Nissan is offering an automaker discount of up to $6,000 on the Leaf. And then if a sort of typical utility incentive for a moderate income is $1,500. So that brings the price down to about $14,000. And to the right of that is someone who's with less than 50,000 adjusted gross income, qualifying for higher state incentive, so up to 4,000, and a higher utility incentive up to 2,500. It is important to flag that sometimes those lower income folks may not be able to take full advantage of the federal tax credit. Although if they lease, then the leasing company can get that credit and pass it through to the leasing customer. So there are ways for lower income folks to still get the benefit of that federal tax credit through leasing. And that's my quick run through. So I'm happy to answer any questions about incentives or the current market, and appreciate the time this morning.
Great. Senator McDonald?
If you had to summarize the single most the single most important reason why we're only up to 1% over the last decade or so, what would you say that is?
It's hard to pick just one thing because there's really many things contributing. I think a big factor has been the lack of affordable all-wheel drive vehicles. That's about 80% of the Vermont marketplace right now are sort of crossovers, SUVs, pickup trucks. So, the lack of having vehicles that are competitive. Another factor is just the lack of available used EVs. So used vehicles are about 2/3 of annual sales in Vermont. And we need to get more new EVs on the road before we see them show up in the used market. And we're seeing right now it's about 10% of the new EV registrations are coming out of that pre-owned market. So that's important. Those are some of the key issues, but a big one is, people just aren't aware of the options that are out there and how they might work with their lifestyle, or maybe they think they're too expensive when in reality there are some affordable options. So that's been a real barrier as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before going to Senator McCormick, let me just ask a quick follow-up. We heard you say that many EVs or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, when they come off lease, they leave the state. And why is it that we seem to have so many? We would love to grow that pool of used efficient electric vehicles or plug-ins, and but they seem to go. Why is that?
Not all of them are going, so that's the good news. But what generally happens when a vehicle comes off lease is the dealer that is taking that off lease return on behalf of the customer doesn't actually own the vehicle at that point. It's the leasing company that owns it. So the dealer is sort of handling that transaction, and the leasing company will give the dealer an option to buy that vehicle, usually at the sort of it depends, but generally speaking, at the value that was negotiated at the start of the lease, which may not be the current value of the vehicle. So in some cases, that what's called residual value on the lease may be higher than what it's currently going for at auction. So there's not a big incentive for the dealer to pick it up at that point and try to sell it if they're paying more than what the current market value is. And so that means that the leasing company sends it to an auction, and there are no Vermont auctions, large Vermont auto auctions, so that typically they'll go into the Boston metro area or someplace like that where they have these large regional auctions that Vermont dealers can go to, and many do, to get supply of pre-owned vehicles. But there's no guarantee that when they're doing that, that they'll then pick up some of these off-lease EVs. And right now we're seeing that some of those may be going to states that have more attractive incentives for pre-owned EVs. So California has had a program that Michelle mentioned in the context of the Replace Your Ride. So it's possible that some of these vehicles may be getting transported to states that have more attractive programs for used EV incentives. So that's one of the considerations I know the folks working on Replace Your Ride are taking into consideration.
Okay. And I think, thank you. And Senator McCormick, I think last question on EVs for the morning to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for my earlier absence. I was testifying in another committee. On your chart where you were comparing how with all the incentives an EV can actually be more affordable than the gas car. Yeah, here's the chart. I noticed that the largest incentive there is the federal tax credit. And you made mention that lower income people have some way of getting a tax incentive, or at least accessing something in that direction. I'm sorry for that, if you can hear it in the background. Can you go into a little more detail on how a lower income person might benefit?
Yes. So the federal tax credit goes technically to the owner of the vehicle. And when someone leases, the owner of the vehicle is technically the leasing company. So that leasing company can get the benefit of the tax credit, and in most instances will pass through at least the majority, if not all, of that federal tax credit in the form of basically a way to reduce the lease expenses. Their leasing companies have different ways of doing this, but at the end of the day, it usually ends up that someone leasing an electric vehicle can do it at a much lower monthly or down payment cost than someone leasing a comparable gasoline vehicle. There is legislation that Congressman Welch has introduced that would sort of expand on that and allow lower income, or anyone for that matter, I believe, to transfer the tax credit to a finance entity, which is based off something that the state of Colorado has been doing with their incentive program. So it is possible that as the federal tax credit is expanded or extended, that they may consider a measure like that that would allow a lower income person who doesn't want to lease and doesn't have a large tax liability to still be able to get the benefit of it. But that's speculative at this point, but there have been conversations in that direction.
Okay, well, thank you very much. A lot to learn. I mean, the slide that we're ending on is one of those slides that I think most people have never seen. And there's this mythology that these cars are just too expensive for a lot of folks. So we look forward through the kinds of programming we heard about from the agency team to break down some of those myths, barriers, et cetera, and keep working on it.
Mr. Chairman,
right.
I did have another question. I know we're racing time here, and I do apologize for the background noise. One of the problems I hear from people about the electric cars is the question of range. What are we doing to get more charging stations?
So there's, I might pitch it to Michelle, but there's a number of things going on. The state of Vermont has been investing Volkswagen diesel settlement funds and is looking to continue investing, even though those funds are running short on what the state can do for charging. There are additional investments proposed. And right now, the state just signed a contract with Blink to build out 11 additional fast charging locations. Basically, once those are in place, that will make it so that anywhere you are in almost anywhere you are in Vermont, you won't be further than 30 miles to one of these fast charging locations. So there's state investments that are happening. Some of the utilities have programs to support private investment. So Green Mountain Power has been helping with what's called some of the make ready for building out fast charging to reduce the costs. They also have programs to reduce some of the demand charges that Riley was speaking of earlier for public fast charging. There are also requirements in the state building energy code for new developments to include larger new developments to include at least sort of EV readiness, which is an important consideration. That's often the best time to put in charging is as part of a larger project. So those are some of the ways that the state and partners are working to build out more charging. And just an interesting fact is Vermont has the highest per capita availability of charging in the country right now.
So still largely local or at least regional traffic. If I wanted to drive from Vermont to visit my son in Wyoming, taking I-80 through Nebraska, would I be able to do that in an electric vehicle?
You could certainly do it in a Tesla, which Tesla has built out their own network of fast charging across the country, and they make it very easy. For other makes of EVs, it's getting better, and certainly there are people who've made that trip. But it requires some planning and sort of having a backup. And so it's not seamless, as I know folks are hoping it will be. And there are General Motors, as part of their recent announcements, has said that they're going to be investing significantly in fast charging. Some of the other automakers, many states. So it's a work in progress for sure, but it's getting better.
But the Northeast, you can get around the Northeast.
It's getting better. I mean, so New Hampshire is a little bit behind Vermont. They've had some struggles getting their Volkswagen diesel settlement funds put to good use. They went out to bid and didn't have any responsive bidders to build out some fast charging, so that they're a little behind. So it's certainly possible to get around with a Tesla today. And you can, if you're driving a Chevrolet Bolt, which is what I drive, you could certainly get around the Northeast. But as I said, you probably want to do some planning and make sure that you've got a backup option if, for example, some of the fast charging that's available today just has one charger at that location. So if there's a problem with it, you might be facing an issue. So it's always good to have backups.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McCormick, I know you had to present your bill. Ms. Boomhauer's presentation includes point by point on the issue you raised in terms of the particular efforts and the new funding for more build out. So if you check that, if you check the documents on our website, you'll find more on this too. Well, so thanks very much for getting us rolling. Sorry, bad pun, but that's the way it is this one. We are going to roll right on now and learn more about the state's energy management program and going back to, so thank you again. I know everyone's got other stuff to do. Don't feel bad about just hitting the eject button. With that, I'd like to go back to Mr. Walk, Mr. Philcorn, Mr. Edson, and check in on the Semp. So we've worked with you all in the past, trying to bring shoehorn money to the program. I apologize that we're going to try to just do a brief touch and go. There'll be more to learn, but we're just getting introduced to what's being proposed now compared to what's being proposed versus what's already happening. So if you could give us the high level walkthrough on what this part of the governor's recommend does, we'd love to get the conversation started.
Sure, gentlemen, I'll quickly start and then hand it off to the two of you, and you can decide how you want to present. But as we were developing the governor's proposal for around weatherization, this has been work to expand the Semp program into the municipal space has been going on for a couple of years of trying to get some real momentum moving. And so this really gave the program a shot in the arm and the opportunity to really make some meaningful changes at some of our hardest to reach and most needed buildings. So with that, I will hand it over to Eric and Dan, whoever wants to go, but I really appreciate the opportunity for this to be heard and for the overall package to be considered. So thank you.
Great. Can I ask a very beginner's question, just so that we'll have a benchmark? Can you, as part of your remarks, can you say what current budget is versus what the budget would look like under the proposed? Thank you.
Sure. Eric, you want me to take it?
And I yield to you. It's your program. I'm just arm candy today.
No way. You're always more than that. Good morning. My name is Daniel Edson. I'm the State Energy Program Manager. Thank you for having me today. So BGS has administered the State Energy Management Program, the Semp, for roughly 7 years since I started my service in state government. And that has been focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy efforts within state government-owned facilities. Our program has been very successful. We set out to save $150,000 annually, and barring a pandemic, we've been able to do that. And so roughly 2 years ago, we started conversations with the Clean Energy Finance Collaborative to look at opportunities for how to best serve the municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals sector within Vermont. This sector was identified as a key component of meeting our 90 by 50 goals here in Vermont and our GHG emissions reduction goals. But it was obvious that this particular sector was underserved, and the main private entity that would provide energy efficiency reduction services to this group would be energy service companies, ESCOs. And so, with a lot of research and working with different partners throughout Vermont, we came to the conclusion that the majority of ESCOs are looking for bigger fish to fry. Essentially, they have a low limit on their project dollar amount. And so a lot of our municipalities cannot utilize those services because their projects just aren't big enough. And we've heard ESCOs say, we'll come down to 500,000, most of them like $1 million project and up. And then there are some ESCOs that serve in this sector that are willing to come down to a lower dollar amount, but they're few and far between. And so, after a lot of back and forth on this, I provided a presentation on what the Semp does. And so essentially what we've done is we've developed a internalized energy performance contracting model where we have our own project managers and our own revolving loan funds that are utilized to implement energy efficiency projects within state government buildings. And those revolving loan funds that are used to fund the projects are paid back with the energy savings associated with each project. And so that's kind of the model overview. And what we did was we began to develop a pilot program that would expand upon the Semp to do this type of work within municipalities. And we looked at how the Semp program and team could effectively get at that. And then I guess the last thing that I'll leave you with before there's any questions is that the scope got narrowed, and we acknowledged that schools and universities, colleges and universities in Vermont and hospitals are a different beast. And so our focus now is on cities and towns, municipal buildings, and K through 12 schools. And then I guess I'll just also put out there for background that we have received funding for 2 positions for a 2-year pilot. And that funding also is available for us to perform energy audits on these facilities as well. And that funding is through 2 different entities. One is through VLIGHT, and the other one is through the Clean Energy Development Fund. And so that's matching funds. So that money has been granted to us. And then what's on the table now for the governor's spending plan is $5 million to be put into a revolving loan fund for implementation of these projects. And there is language to be introduced by House Corrections Institutions today, I believe at 12:30.
Great. Okay. Any committee questions? One quick question. So what's the size of the fund currently? How much have you granted? How much is your annual, income from? Do you receive monies back, or how do you replenish the fund?
So this is a brand new project that has not spent a dime. It's a pilot.
Okay.
And so we essentially have a proposed operational budget, which is sitting at $600,000 for 2 years, and that includes staffing and energy audits, and that's all that we have in terms of program implementation, funding budget. And then the $5 million is the proposed money, which obviously needs to pass into statute in order for us to have access to. So we haven't spent that yet as well. But I guess for reference, you could look at our current program, the Semp, and our annual burn rate on average for our revolving loan funds is roughly $1 million a year. And the limitation on that is staffing. So if you have more staff, you can spend more money, you can get at more projects.
Sure. Can you help me understand the basic money model here? I mean, I can see how if the state invests in weatherization and efficiency in its own buildings, and then your operating costs drop. So in essence, you save enough to have paid back the investment. It's just more like a homeowner. But if you're performing this service for a municipality, then are they returning your investment to you based on the savings, and then eventually they go into the black where they're no longer paying off your investment in them and they're just savings?
Correct. Yeah. So they would have to go through a bond vote and secure these funds, and it would be a loan to them, and they would enter into a contractual agreement based on the loan terms to repay those, that annual dollar amount back to the state, which would be put back into the revolving loan fund on an annual basis to be reinvested in other projects.
Okay. And so that we have a sense of scale. So this is a possible $5 million into the fund to help enable you to do this work. How much is the total investment in the last 7 years been in terms of previous work?
Within the Semp?
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't have that number off the top of my head right now, but I could get it to you. I would say that we have probably invested over the past 7 years less than 5 million, close to that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's just helpful. So this is, there's a big opportunity here, is what it sounds like, especially for outreach. So Efficiency Vermont works with different commercial, industrial, residential customers around the state, including municipalities. Do you work with Efficiency Vermont to deliver these services, or is this, I'm trying to sense of what the relationship is between the two organizations?
Sure, yeah, I work with Efficiency Vermont every day. And we have a very close relationship, and they are part of what we call the core Semp team. And for this new initiative, the Semp expansion, they have dedicated one full-time employee, or the equivalent, I would say, of one full-time employee annually to the Semp expansion program, which is similar to, what they have committed to the Semp, but they also, Efficiency Vermont, through their energy efficiency utility charge funds, their incentive pot, essentially, they, rather than providing BGS with incentives on our projects, they fund 3 positions within BGS.
Right.
To annually to achieve the savings within the Semp and state buildings.
I think, in previous years, we talked about, was that likely to change or continue? For instance, if the program had enough return, would these become state positions? Well, I don't know, they may be state positions funded by EVT, right? Or
Yes.
are they EVT employees who are sort of almost like inserted into your office?
No, they're not EVT employees. They are state employees.
Okay.
Yep, they have full-time positions. And not last session, the prior session, the 4-year Semp program was expanded for an additional 4 years.
Right. Right. I think we had Chris Cole in to pull off his swan song act with our committee. We didn't know at the time. Okay, so any committee questions? I guess I have one quick one so K through 12. Senator Campion chairs education. There's always pressure on education budgets. How are schools able to reach out to this? How do you anticipate reaching out to let schools know, and how do you anticipate choosing which projects? Because I imagine there'll be a lot more demand than $1 million a year, or even
Sure. Yeah. I think through our pilot, which is incredibly necessary in order for us to, have a slow start and be successful and work out, the areas that aren't going to work. We'll focus primarily on municipalities. There is language in the proposed bill currently regarding equity in distribution. And so that's a key focus for us and the administration. How we incorporate schools is unknown at this time. So we've reached out to the Superintendent's Association to begin those conversations. Right now, we're working with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and they're part of the core group. The Superintendent's Association is obviously very busy right now, and so we haven't bothered them too much with this, but we would welcome additional conversations to discuss how they will get rolled into the program. I think that the schools have a fantastic opportunity at hand regarding the work with indoor air quality and how that can be married with energy efficiency. And now's the time. So those conversations have begun, especially with myself and Efficiency Vermont. But again, it's just, what do we have capacity to really do?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Giving a look around the room here to see if there's any questions. Mr. Edson or Mr. Fulkhorn, who has so far evaded any and all questions. I think someone should have a
Consider that to
question
be a
for him,
success.
just for him. Okay. Well, seeing none, thanks so much for just introducing the concept to us and helping us understand what's in development. I think, the committee strongly endorsed the work previously, and so saw a lot of value in what was happening. It's one of those things of the state leading by example.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your time.
Okay. All right. Thanks again. Good to see you again. With that, committee, we are going to change gears and move on to hearing from Rich Coward and Don Rendell, who are I'm looking for. There's his square. Okay, so good morning, Mr. Coward, Mr. Rendell. How are you? Good to see you both again. We've been waiting with bated breath to learn about the clean heat standards as we've been plunging on weatherization and transportation. So we'd love to learn more about what you're working on and the fit that you see, if there's one, alongside with the weatherization effort.
All right, thanks very much. I'll just say a couple of words of hello to the committee. It's great to be with you again. And I should begin with the usual caveats. As some of you know, I've been a principal at the Regulatory Assistance Project for a number of years. Previously was chair of what is now the Public Utilities Commission. I've had roles at Efficiency Vermont, DEIC, and working with Don on a working committee of the Energy Action Network, and recently been appointed to the Climate Council. And I need to emphasize that everything I'm saying today is just on my own behalf. I'm not speaking for any of those institutions. You've been hearing quite a lot about weatherization, as the chair just mentioned. And we do have an important message for you today about the essential complement to the weatherization initiative, which is a clean fuels or clean heat standard in Vermont. And I want to emphasize, we are entirely supportive of the weatherization initiative. We've supported it forever. And we're glad to see the progress that's being made right now. It's just that we need to let you know that probably 2/3 of the thermal challenge in Vermont is not going to be solved by weatherization. It has to be solved through changing out the fuel sources that we use to heat buildings. And so we're here to talk about a strategy to approach that other 2/3. And you might, I think these are, in some respects, amazing times in public policy. General Motors announces it's going to do away with building gasoline vehicles. I work in Europe. Poland, which is a coal-based economy, announced they're going to do away with coal mining. this is a good time to sort of take stock and realize that we can do more than we used to think that we could accomplish. And here I'm struck by the fact that a former chair of the state's regulatory commission and a former CEO of its largest fossil provider are joined up here to recommend to you a policy to move away from fossil heat in Vermont. So Don, do you want to say anything just by way of introduction, or shall we just go to the slides?
Sure, very briefly. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here with you. And it's been a real thrill for me to be working with Rich and the team that we've assembled to strategize around how we can set some new policy direction that will help us achieve the imperative that we have before us, right? The planetary imperative and our Vermont imperative around decarbonizing the thermal sector. You know, the VGS, my former employer, by way of introduction, I am retired, and here today as a Vermonter and as a former part of the team at VGS, and before that, 13 years at Green Mountain Power. The challenge is daunting, and we've got a real opportunity here as we dig in and lean into this to make some real progress. And I'm proud of the work that we started at VGS before I left, and I really look forward to the opportunity here for VGS to play a significant role. We're about 25%. VGS is about 25% of the state's thermal GHG emissions, and about 75% resides in that unregulated fuel sector, oil and propane. And the opportunity that we're exploring here gives us the tools that will allow us to advance the ball both on the natural gas side and on the oil and propane side to put us on a track to achieve the mandates that we have before us. I'll turn it back to you.
All right then.
As you get, can I jump in just a second as we transition to your presentation? That is, I would say the committee has evolved some in the last month. From Mr. Coda came in and pointed out after the Act 62 report that it referred to fuel switching something like, I think it was 56 times, and which he found somewhat objectionable because it was taken by most people to mean that you would be moving from a fossil-based fuel to electricity. And he wanted the committee to be aware of the opportunity for renewable liquid fuels for heat, and which we are happy to learn more about. So we're agnostic really on technology. We're looking for the gains in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, and not wedded to any particular technology. And the other thing was that from the get-go, although making it explicit again, that we wanted to make sure that as we go through this transition to cleaner fuels, that for those who are delivering fuels we might now call dirty or something like that, I don't want to be pejorative, but we want to create a pathway for those people to succeed and come along with us. It's not a them versus us thing, it's us, and how do we create opportunities for everyone who's interested in participating. So sorry to editorialize, but that has come out clear in our committee discussions in the last 3 weeks, and I wanted you to know where we were compared to where we were 3 weeks ago.
So let me be really clear with you. We're nodding as you said those two things, Senator. The design of the proposal that we are working on is fully in line with both of the statements you just made. And we've been there from the beginning in the design of this program. I'm going to try and share my screen. I will do my best. There are a few steps here. I'll be right with you.
Success.
Okay. And if I do it right, I can, oh, that should be fine. All right, so we called this Clean Heat for a Cooler Planet. And the proposal that our group is working on, and I should emphasize that this is a work in progress, and we have not fully designed the program. We don't have proposed legislation. We have the outlines and principles of a program that we think satisfies the objectives that your committee is working towards. And it's a clean heat standard. You all have heard, I suppose, a great deal of testimony about the challenge of fossil heat. But I can tell you, as someone who has spent many years working on reforms to the electric power sector in order to reduce emissions in that sector, that I think changing inputs to the electric power sector is a relatively easy job compared with thinking about heat, because heat involves so many millions of end-use applications and so many millions of customers. And the methods for assisting those customers to change the way they heat buildings or the way they insulate the buildings just requires a much different approach. So it's a huge challenge, and yet I think we can do it. I'm pretty optimistic about being able to do it. You know that heat is 28, depending on how you count, 28 or 30% of Vermont's climate emissions. We know we need to reduce that by 40% quickly, 80% by 2050 at least. And I like to use the terms that buildings are hard and slow. They're hard because they don't involve decision makers just upstream in the path of commerce, like an energy utility purchasing or building a different power plant. They involve end use customers on a day-to-day basis. And it takes a while to address those needs across the customer base. I'd also emphasize, I'm emphasizing something here that Senator Bray just talked about. We love our fuel choices. We in Vermont have strong relationships with our fuel dealers. Fuel dealers are really important. And nothing that we're gonna say here is meant in any way to regard fuel dealers as anything other than partners in the transition that we need to undertake. However, we need to just recognize the hard fact. Those emissions, we've been very aggressive in Vermont and very successful with respect to the power sector. And we have done very little with respect to the delivered fuels sector. And those emissions are unregulated and also unpriced. The next slide is something you've probably seen before. It just scales what it would take to meet the obligations that the legislature has now enacted for reducing Vermont's emissions by 2025. On this slide, but there's similar, challenges posed with respect to the thermal sector. And if you look at this chart, the electricity sector is doing pretty well. Agriculture is relatively small, and the thermal and transportation sectors are where we have to turn our attention. I'm sure the committee is well aware of that. We're thinking, we are asking ourselves, how can we engage Vermont heat suppliers and customers to make the switches that we need to reduce emissions like this. So we put our heads together and came up with the idea of a clean heat standard. A clean heat standard, let me just start by giving you the analogy at the bottom of this slide. we're all used to the idea of a renewable portfolio standard for electricity. We have across the country something, I don't even know how many now, over 35 states have adopted renewable portfolio standards requiring electricity suppliers to gradually increase the fraction of renewable power in their portfolios. And so by putting the obligation on the supplier is required either by investing in utility scale renewables or by incenting end use customers to do distributed solar or what have you to deliver that fraction of electricity. And it grows over time, and over time we see that gradually we have improved, in Vermont, significantly improved the content of our power supply. Well, we can do the same thing on the thermal side. So a clean heat standard is an obligation on providers to deliver a growing fraction of low emission heat across their sales. The percentage would grow over time. It would be scaled to a wholesale provider's past year sales, or perhaps an average of 3-year sales, something like that. And now to get to Senator Bray's point, what counts as clean? We're agnostic too. If it's clean, it's clean. When we want to measure how clean it is, that's our goal. Renewable fuels, including biodiesel, renewable gas, heat pumps, and advanced wood heat in Vermont should all count. Why a clean heat standard instead of something else? In other places, the debate is around carbon taxes, let's say, or a carbon cap and trade regime. One of the things that we have learned from globally, and this is something that I've worked on in numerous countries and states, is that carbon taxes alone are a really weak tool for the heat sector. It's really hard, just by raising prices, to drive change in the thermal sector. Customers need a lot more than simply higher prices before they're going to insulate their homes, before they're going to change out their furnace, or insist that their fuel dealer deliver biofuels to them. What economists call the price elasticity of demand in heat is just really low. It's empirically proven. So just raising prices is just a very backwards way of trying to accomplish what we're trying to do here. I'd also add that fuel dealers in Vermont are important partners. And you all know this. We need ultimately to create businesses in Vermont that we would generally, instead of calling them fuel dealers, we're going to call them heat suppliers. We're going to call them consultants and heating experts who will help us choose the right system for our buildings. I started out by saying efficiency is super important, and we have to really double down even on weatherization. But it only solves a third or a quarter of the needed emission cuts that we need to meet our carbon goals. Renewable portfolio standard has worked, and we also have seen it on the efficiency side. A mandate to increase the delivery of efficiency services by roughly 2% a year, year after year after year, has built up demonstrably in Vermont. A performance standard like a clean heat standard is not picking winners. We're not asking the Senate to choose wood chips or wood pellets or heat pumps over biofuels or renewable gas. We're suggesting that legislation that would create a clean heat standard would let customers choose, suppliers choose, and market forces choose which ultimate solutions, and there'll probably be many, some that we don't even know about right now. We'll choose which ones of those will make it in the market. But market certainty in terms of a demand, a certain demand in Vermont is important. If we want energy companies to innovate, they need to know the market will be there, and the market will be there if a standard is in place. And just a final note about flexibility. Providers, not all, we've heard from many folks that, there are fuel dealers out there who are not interested in changing their business, who would just rather not take on the complications or the training necessary to become a different kind of business. And that's okay. Under this proposal, they can buy credits from entities that do want to be in that business. Now a point about balance. You've received, you've had testimony on the Act 62 report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So maybe you don't need me to dwell very much on this slide. This is something I've been concerned about for a long time, that we have successfully put a huge fraction of the climate responsibility on the regulated fuels sectors. And power customers are paying in their power bills for, and benefiting in their power bills from the energy efficiency charges and the renewables obligations. And we've put the burden on the electric sector, but it's time now to recognize that fossil heat is polluting more and paying less, and the price signals are tilted backwards. It is time to level the playing field, and time for the fossil fuel sector to step up and face a performance obligation similar to what the regulated sectors have faced.
Right. And I'll just chime in one little quick comment, because this committee has actually been responsible for tipping the field, making it a little less level, but only in the form of opening up pilot programs under Act 62 and then S337 last year that are time limited, $6 million over 3 years. And we said it all the way along, this is not a permanent, right. This is not where we want to go. What we want to do is facilitate, because it's the money we have at hand and the politics of the moment, we at least want to make a start, but we don't want to continue that. So thanks for, we're in agreement with you, even though we might look as though we went the other direction.
Well, I think it's great that you opened the door. I think, and you're right to say, well, okay, we opened the door. Now let's figure out, how to create more balance across the sectors. And
can we pause for a moment? Senator McDonald has a question.
I got lost on the last slide where it said fossil heat pollutes more and pays less. When you say pays less, what does that mean?
Well, I just mean that in the electricity sector, if you look at the support for efficiency Vermont, for example, those charges are on the regulated fuels, not on the.
Oh, contributes less. Okay, contributes less to the effort.
Contributes less to decarbonization. Right.
Thank you.
Shorthand. Okay, so we have given, our working group has given a great deal of thought to how one would design a clean heat standard. And there are a lot of design choices, of course. I'm going to give you a summary of where we are now in our thinking, and recognizing that this is a work in progress. The first question is what's called the point of regulation. Who is obliged under the equivalent of a renewable portfolio standard or a clean heat standard. And we've talked to a lot of people about this and received the general point of view is that Vermont can impose a clean heat obligation on wholesale providers selling fossil heating fuels for consumption in Vermont. So the obligation to own credits, clean heat credits, would be imposed fairly high upstream in the chain of commerce and not on every fuel dealer, particularly small scale fuel dealers delivering fuel in Vermont. So this is where we collect the revenues for the what used to be called the Weatherization Trust Fund, now has a different name. And it's basically, think of the bulk tank rack where the fuel trucks go to load up, or the point of importation into the state of Vermont. And Don's nodding because he's got a pipeline that we would consider the point of entry of those fossil fuels into Vermont. It doesn't have to be done that way, but we think imposing the obligation upstream on those larger scale entities is more efficient. What to count? What we're really after is carbon reductions. You know, we're not really counting burner tips. We're counting tons of emissions. And now we're not going to put a meter on everybody, a carbon meter on everybody's burner tip, but we can deem through just the average emission rates of what the emission rates are from a gallon of fuel oil, a gallon of propane, a gallon of renewable biodiesel, etc. What should be the pace of change? We know we haven't actually decided on what the curve should look like. And this is something that requires some thought because there's some debate as to how fast we should go. But if you just do the math to achieve a 40% reduction by 2025, that X percent per year has got to be relatively high to start. And the good news is that with the technologies we have in hand, we actually can achieve that. How do obligated fuel sellers meet the obligation? They can just imagine an obliged entity meeting its obligation by just blending in biofuels. That's something that can be done relatively easily, relatively soon. They could work through their fuel dealers to deliver savings at the end use level. What we're already doing in tier 3 shows that we can do it, installing heat pumps and pellet stoves. Or if they don't want to do that, any of those things, they can just purchase credits from somebody else, such as Efficiency Vermont or the weatherization agencies that are doing it. So there's actually a pretty straightforward way of designing a program that would accomplish what we need to do. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Don in just a second. Other design issues that we are working on and don't have complete solutions for, but we can see the solutions. This first bullet on this slide is just making the point that we need both clean heat and weatherization. I started off with that point. I'm almost going to finish with that point. And just imagine that you're financing a big program for weatherization. What a perfect time to target those exact units for a clean fuels future, heating that building. You know, heat pumps and weatherization are like, you know, apple pie and ice cream or something. We have to just do both. We obviously have to target assistance to moderate and low income households. And we can think of multiple ways to do that. Credit multipliers is an easy way. You know, if the units that you've helped to switch are low and moderate income units, you get a credit multiplier. We provide cash supports for those units. Or you have a mandate. X% of your credits have to come from those units, as we do with Efficiency Vermont. And of course, we should marry it up with weatherization assistance. We don't have a program designed for helping smaller fuel dealers with workforce training, but we know it needs to be part of the program. And we've been talking with fuel dealers about that. I mean, that's something that they're excited to participate in. The vision that we have for this program is that the enterprises that deliver fossil heat in Vermont today can have a welcome opportunity to change their businesses to deliver low carbon heat. And that's what we want. I mean, somebody asked me when we first presented this idea last fall, somebody asked me, you know, how can we work with the fuel dealers on this? And my first answer was, tell your fuel dealers we love you. We want you to succeed. We want the low carbon heat future of Vermont to be served by Vermont-based businesses that can succeed at this. I mean, that's what this is about. So, and by the way, we heard from the National Energy and Fuels Institute. Have you heard from them yet?
We have not.
So at Sean Coda and some colleagues from the National Trade Association met with our working group recently, and they were flat out in favor of transitioning their businesses to renewable biogas and other forms of low carbon heat. And their statements to us sounded like something that, I mean, they actually said it. One of their quotes from their press statement was, "We have announced a plan that many thought unachievable. And yet we believe it's achievable and well within reach. A plan to reduce emissions of the fossil heat sector 20% by 2023, 50% by 2030, and 100% by 2050. And for them to be out of fossil fuels entirely." We had a great conversation with them about this idea. And we have a lot more talking to do, but just to let you know that the industry is in, at least his say, in my experience, the industry is in a different place with regard to ideas like this than they were a few years ago.
How many years ago?
A few, even 2 years ago. So we were very encouraged by their enthusiasm, and I think, you know, frankly, that you know, times have changed.
Okay. Mr. Coward, can you send us, you know, a link or a name or something like that, so we can we'll have something and we'll check in with you again. But send us a little information on that group that I'm not familiar with. Okay,
yeah, I will send you for sure that information. It was a very encouraging meeting. So now I'd like to turn attention to the natural gas challenge, which is a little bit different, and you know, different for a variety of reasons, including you know, the fact that as a regulated utility with pipeline infrastructure, it's just it presents different challenges, and it's an industry that has different responsibilities. And
before we go to Ms. Rendell, can you, I don't know what tag type working group is.
Oh, the Technical Assistance Group. for tier 3.
Yeah, now I
I
thank
mean,
you.
one of the nice things, one of the experiences that we can build on here is that we have through tier 3 gone through the exercise of figuring out, well, how beneficial is a pellet stove? How beneficial is it to install a heat pump? How many tons are we saving? What's the emission rate per million BTUs? That kind of thing. That part of this, of a clean heat standard, is not really all that difficult. We could debate all day long, what's the life cycle carbon emission rate from a gallon of propane versus a ton of fuel of pellets. And there's a lot of technical details there, but when it all sugars off, there are straightforward answers. But they have to be resolved, and an advisory group of some kind is appropriate for doing it. I guess in the final analysis, I would say to administer a program like this, a program of credits and obligations, if I were writing the legislation, I would probably ask the Public Utility Commission to do that. And perhaps the department, or maybe a different agency, but some state agency needs to be responsible for imposing the obligation and determining what's a creditable action.
Right, right. We were referred to the Vermont Transportation Energy Profile, and there was some work in there that was, there was a lot of helpful information in there. But one of which was new to me was that I had not realized that the California Air Resources Board has established greenhouse gas intensity values for different fuel types. So you can legitimize the notion of how renewable a fuel is, or what kind of impacts it has.
That's correct. There's a fair degree of coherence around these numbers. There's some debatable points, but I like I said, that should not be viewed as a problem. That should just be viewed as something you ask a responsible agency to determine for the purposes of this program.
Great, thank you.
So, meanwhile, we have in Vermont a leading natural gas company, and I apologize to Don. I've come to call the product fossil gas, just to remind ourselves that natural gas is also a fossil fuel. But Vermont Gas is in a leading position, and I think Don deserves a lot of credit for that. I'm just going to turn it over to him.
Great. Thank you, Rich.
Tell me when to move the slides.
Sure. Yes, if you can drive, that would be great. Let me start just by saying that two things by way of introduction. First is that when as I've been thinking about this and working with Rich and the team on this, the really encouraging part of our thinking has been that we're focused on how to get the emissions down and on greenhouse gas tons, as opposed to focusing on how many homes should be switched to advanced pellet stoves, how many homes should be switched to cold climate heat pumps, how much renewable fuel in the system. It's all about using all of these tools in an integrated way to actually get tons out of the atmosphere. And if we keep our focus there, then we'll get where we want to go. It's going to be really important for us to keep our eye on the ball as to what technologies, what fuel sources, to your point, Senator Bray, actually achieve those goals, and that we track them in a really disciplined way. The second introductory point I'd like to make is that is really working off of a comment that you made a little earlier, Senator McDonald, and that is how many years and how times have changed. You know, it wasn't very long ago that our state energy plan had a significant focus on extending the natural gas system as a way of both making fuel more affordable for Vermont families and businesses, and also for making it cleaner, reducing those emissions, both traditional pollution emissions and GHG emissions. And we've done a lot of transformative thinking about that in the last now 10 years or so. I think that the last energy plan that had gas up on the table as an important energy source to expand and extend was 2011. And it was in 2016 that we made that shift with the state energy plan away from extending natural gas infrastructure to looking at ways to reduce carbon fuels throughout the state in a more intensive way, a way more intensive way, rather than cutting emissions by a quarter or a third, looking to achieve our energy goals, which are way deeper decarbonization than we had envisioned before. And we've been working at Vermont Gas to figure out a way to achieve those goals. And I think this clean heat standard is a really interesting and promising approach for helping us get there from here. And what I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes, and I won't take up too much of your time because I know you've heard from Neil Underville and you know what Vermont Gas is doing here in its energy plan, to talk about regulation and how we must rethink the regulatory model around utility regulation in relation to Vermont Gas to help us make this progress. So Rich, let's move forward a slide, please.
And Mr. Rendell, just by way of pacing, we have a hard stop in about 10 minutes.
Okay, well, I will.
And again, this has been a fast-moving morning, but we're really introducing things more than feeling like we're solving things, you know.
Sure. Well, so what's the exit plan for fossil gas? We've got to get there from here. And we're going to require a new business model for the company to achieve this with the human and capital assets that we have. And you know, if you think about us and the liquid fuel providers, we've got this enormous infrastructure of customer relationships, of human capital and system capital, and we certainly ought to be looking for ways to mobilize that human capital and capitalize on those customer relationships to help our customers find it irresistible to achieve decarbonization in heating their buildings. And that's really where we're headed. And that's where that's what we need to achieve. And we've got to rethink how the regulatory framework gets us there. Rich, next slide, please. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen this before, and I won't dwell on it except to say that that this is an S curve here to get from where we are today to 2050. And our first marker at VGS when we announced our climate plan in 2019 was 2030. We picked that date as a marker so that we could challenge ourselves and be transparent about how much we were going to achieve in the short run, and not leave this all for accomplishing our goals in the last 5 or 10 years. we've got to make some serious progress now. And 30% was the number that we keyed on at the time. I actually hope that number will grow as we see more investment throughout the world in clean energy technologies. But that's where we're headed. I think, Rich, we can skip the next slide and go right to slide 13, which is to talk just for a few minutes about what commodity gas regulation looks like today, and then what it might look like as we look ahead. Today, gas regulation, just like old-fashioned electric utility regulation, is focused on promoting safety, excellent customer service, and affordability, the lowest rates using a cost-based approach to regulation. We have promoted and embedded in regulation challenges and goals around end-use energy efficiency, but not really on decarbonization of the fuel supply or decarbonization of the actual heating that we use in the buildings throughout Vermont. Our utility regulation promotes long-lived investments and new service hookups. When we invest in these systems, our regulatory structure rewards us for depreciating them over a really long period of time, 50 years, sometimes 70 years. And that puts a really strong incentive on holding on to those systems and continuing to use them. We don't have plans in traditional utility regulations around decommissioning a system because of our imperative around changing how we deliver the service. Our plans for decommissionings are really focused on how we can use these assets for as long as possible. And as Rich pointed out, there's just no strategy to replace fossil heat with low carbon options in a traditional regulatory model. When we think about the future and what a new regulatory framework might look like, we of course want to continue to protect safety, customer service, and where there is a monopoly, cost-based rates. But make no mistake, we're moving into a much more competitive world around heating sources, and that's a good thing. When we talk about cold climate heat pumps, that's competition for the customer's heating load. It's competition between oil and propane and electricity and advanced wood heat and natural gas, and that competition, I know at my time at Vermont Gas, we felt it every day, both with the potential for new customers and also with our existing customers.
Mr. Chair,
Senator McDonald.
just I feel like I'm running to keep up with this train here. I find it very exciting, so I'm not dismissing it, and I apologize, but what was the last comment you made on the last slide? Something about, but there is no measurement standard.
Yeah, we don't have a standard, an incentive structure, a measure in place that regulates how much carbon is in the fuel source.
Which is
we regulate price, but we don't
to
regulate content.
Which is going to be tied to if you come up with that standard and you tie it to carbon source reductions, then people will know how to profit from meeting that standard. Is that basically the challenge before us?
Well, yes, in this sense that that if you provide the incentives and you give the enterprises the limits or the standard that they have to achieve, you will incent them to
Change the game.
To change the game. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like the 3-point shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. And all aiming at a business model that will make these kinds of new sources really attractive to customers. Because as Rich pointed out, we're talking about how to make changes at that end use level, at that customer level, whether the customer chooses to buy a renewable fuel, whether the customer chooses to change out their heating source, whether the customer chooses a combination of the two. And and going back to the next slide, Rich, the real opportunity here is
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, is in utility regulation, is to start to move that model, as you have in the electric side, to that to a more performance-based standard, where you have the equivalent of a renewable portfolio standard, where you provide incentives to the utility to perform in the way that you want us to perform. You want the utility to perform, which is a combination of affordability and decarbonization, which is deep reductions in the carbon emissions that the utilities customers are sending up their stacks, right? And so what does that mean in real life? It means a regulatory structure that rewards utilities for energy efficiency accomplishments, that will rewards utilities for reducing the carbon content of the fuels they deliver, that rewards utilities for investing in new kinds of heating systems. VGS and Burlington Electric are working very closely on a district heating system for Burlington, for example. A real opportunity there to shift from a fossil fuel source to a renewable source for a significant part of the load in Burlington. And it's those kinds of incentives that a new regulatory twist here, a new regulatory model would help us to achieve. I'll just finish by saying that the more that we can incent reduced emissions by VGS and by the other fuel dealers, the more that we can do that, thinking of it as a level playing field, where we're talking about emissions across the state, and we're talking about applying standards to all the fuel providers, and the faster we can get there, the faster we'll move the needle on greenhouse gas emissions. And as Rich has taught me over many years, the sooner we start reducing those tons, the better, because the early tons are the most valuable tons, and we must not wait too long before we make these changes if we're going to achieve the goals that we have for 2050. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here again.
Great. Well, thank you for a just right intensive delivery of the program, but just to help us get started. And we'll have to think about how we can learn more about it and the place it could play in this bigger puzzle that we're assembling. It feels like there are several complementary streams of work going on in transportation, weatherization, clean heat, and they all are part of this same effort. And then what we're interested in doing is having a series of steps and timelines that funds them adequately and build success for all of them. I don't think we can simultaneously launch all three things at once, but we can design with all three things in mind, and they may phase into a program, something like that. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I would say there's interest, and then the question is, well, how? Practically speaking, how? Senator McDonald, I see you have a.
No, I just this is fascinating, because if you design this properly, no one's going to understand it. And people who understand baseball understand it. And I think I'm way off I'm way out of the ballpark here, but Bob Newhart tries to explain baseball to someone that doesn't understand it, and it's a comedy album. The sheriff in Mayberry RFD tries to explain football in a comedy piece called "What It Was Football," and to someone that has never seen it, and they don't understand it. So you're trying to design something that hasn't been designed yet, but you start out. I think you're telling us how to view the problem.
I look forward to working with you all on the entire thing, but I would say we've come to understand a renewable portfolio standard pretty well.
Right.
And this is a renewable portfolio standard for heat. And that's the one-liner.
Right. So we are over time. Senator McCormick, though, you've been patiently waiting. Do you want to say something quickly? And then I think we all have to go to our caucus.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I just want to warn Senator McDonald's. I recently, defending my civics education bill, I said, you can argue over whether a pitch is a ball or a strike, but you can't play baseball if we don't agree that 3 strikes make an out. For which, at a Democratic Party function, I was soundly scolded for using a sports analogy.
Oh.
So
we
watch
can-
out.
We're getting people out of prison, and we're changing the rules because we're trying to reward something and halt something else. Same thing.
Yeah. So
3
again,
strikes and you're out.
yeah. Thanks so much for coming in. Again, it's just a start, but I felt like we proceeded far enough without hearing from you, and we knew you were doing work that has a close natural relationship to what we're doing. So we'll be following up to figure out how to apply more strands of work together.
Right. Well, please stay in touch. I think there's a pretty straight line towards, how do you say it? I think it's possible to design legislation that would enable this, and that legislation does not have to be very complicated, frankly.
Okay. Good. All right.
Yes,
So-
thank you. And at the end of the day, what at least one vision is, we really want people to buy tickets to the game.
All right.